Could everyone please take their seats? Good morning. Good morning. I guess it's still morning. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Eric Barnhill, and I have the great pleasure of being the president of the General Andrew Pickens chapter for the Sons of the American Revolution. Welcome everybody. I can't believe we got so many people here. We started out with 25 people. And we are now going to get ready, and we're going to signify that with a cannonball. Go for it. Remember, Sons of the American Revolution. That's what we're here.
Awesome. I was going to say.
First of all, you know, we're here to recognize the service of Joseph Chapman. I know we started out with about 10 or 15 Chapman family, and I'd like to recognize all the Chapman family. Would they please stand? Look at this. We have applications to join our chapter in the back.
North Carolina, too.
So you guys are low-hanging fruit for us, so we want you to join our chapters in our society. One of the things that when they came to our chapter and asked us to help out with this, we said we would be glad to. This is the second grave marking that we've done this year for patriots that graves were not marked. At least Joseph's has a headstone on it. The first one we found in a cemetery in a state park, and some well-meaning organization had gone through and collected all these old rocks out of the cemetery and made a pile out of them. And back when this cemetery was active, they didn't have stones with names on them. They just put field stones up. And so we got the state, we got Duke Power involved, we did ground penetrating radar, we found all of the graves in the cemetery, remarked them with field stones, and the Patriot's name that was there was Jesse Hall. And when they were going through and looking with the ground penetrating radar, they came across one stone that had JH on it. So that's the only one where we really know he was buried. But now it's got a VA stone there. It's got a marker much like this one down here that we'll present today. And we're just happy that we can recognize these guys that it's just absolutely amazing to me what they went through. They didn't have any cell phones. How did they get in touch with each other? I'm just reading a book now about General Andrew Pickens, and he said he sent a dispatch over to General Greene. Well, he was 50 miles away. Now, a guy on a fast horse, it would take him 2 days for them to say, what do you want me to do next? So, and when recently my wife and I were in North Carolina, and we were driving back down 85, and we passed cow pens. And I decided just to set the odometer on the car and see how far it was from there to General Andrew Pickens' home was in Tomasi, which is very close to where we are now. For him to leave home and to go to this battle was 5 days, and he was on a horse. Most of the militia were walking. They wore the same clothes for a year. They slept on the ground every night. They foraged for what they ate. So we are just extremely lucky to be here in clean clothes today and drive our cars up here. So it took 5 days to get from here to there. Andrew Pickens was also in the state legislature, and the state capital at that time was in Charleston. Now, 2 weeks on a horse to get to the state legislature. I mean, and that's sleeping on the ground every night and carrying what you're going to eat. And it's unfathomable for us to think about things in that time frame. So we're here again to celebrate one of our Revolutionary War heroes, and that's what they are, the heroes. They're all heroes. He was in the South Carolina and the North Carolina militia, very possibly served under General Andrew Pickens. So we're going to get started, and the color guard is here. Present the colors. Please stand. The color guard commander is very good. Color guard commander is the Blue Ridge chapter of North Carolina. The invitation will be by Carolyn Nation.
I invite you to pray in your faith and tradition as I pray in mine. Father, we're gathered here today to honor and pay tribute to Captain Joseph Chapman. We thank you for him and his service that aided and advanced the cause of independence. We also thank you for his family that are gathered here today. Father, we pause to remember all the men and women throughout our history who bequeathed to us our great heritage. We give you thanks for their loyalty and faith, their courage and self-sacrifice, which were the foundations of our nation. May we never forget these men and women who fought for the freedom of their new country. In your precious name I pray. Amen.
On the back of your program, you'll find the section that we're doing next. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
Color guard, present.
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Carolyn Yarborough will now lead us in the national anthem.
Join me in the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and Pickens chapter.
Good morning. Please join me in the pledge to the SAR. You will find it on the back of your program.
Honor guard, order.
We, the descendants of the heroes of the American Revolution, who by their sacrifice established the United States of America, reaffirm our faith in justice, liberty, our Constitution, and laws, and solemnly pledge ourselves to stand to this great cause. Now would you please join me in the pledge to the flag of South Carolina? I salute the flag of South Carolina. I put my glasses on because I can't see if I can't read it. At this time, I would like to introduce Miss Ann Kilpatrick. She's the District 1 Director of the South Carolina Society of Daughters of the American Revolution. Miss Kilpatrick.
Honor guard, post colors.
Please join me.
Right face.
Thank you, gentlemen. Would you all please join me in reciting the American's Creed? I believe in the United States of America as a government of the people, by the people, for the people, whose just powers are derived from the consent of the governed, a democracy in a republic, a sovereign nation of many sovereign states, a perfect union, one and inseparable, established upon those principles of freedom, equality, justice, and humanity for which American patriots sacrificed their lives and fortunes. I therefore believe it is my duty to my country to love it, to support its Constitution, to obey its laws, to respect its flag, and to defend it against all enemies. I would now like to introduce the children of the American Revolution, who will be reading their creed, and that will be presented by Elizabeth Chapman.
Please join me in the reading of the CAR Creed. I believe in the children of the American Revolution as an organization to raise young people in true patriotism and love of country, in order that they shall find their fitted for American citizenship. As a descendant of the founders of my country, I believe that my birthright brings the responsibility to carry on their work, and that as boys and girls of 1776 took an active part in the War for Independence, so the boys and girls of today have a definite work to do for their country. As a member of the Children of the American Revolution, I believe it is my duty to use my influence to create a deeper love of country, a loyal respect for its Constitution, and reverence for its flag among young people with whom I am contact. I would now like to introduce Ann Kilpatrick.
On the back of your program, the preamble to the Constitution, we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. I would now like to introduce Carolyn Nations, who is the regent for Fort Prince George Chapter, SCDAR.
You may be seated.
As Regent of Fort Prince George Chapter NSDAR, I bring greetings to all who have assembled today to dedicate this marker and to honor the memory of Revolutionary War patriot Captain Joseph Chapman. Many hands and hearts join together to venerate the bravery and sacrifices of Captain Chapman. I want to express my thanks to the General Andrew Pickens Chapter, South Carolina Society, Sons of the American Revolution, and the Blue Ridge Chapter, North Carolina Society, Sons of the American Revolution, for allowing the Fort Prince George Chapter to be a part of this wonderful ceremony today. I would like to recognize our South Carolina DAR dignitaries that are with us. If you will stand and be recognized as your name is called. South Carolina State Regent, Bonnie Bell Glasgow Moffett. State Organizing Secretary, Mari Norray. District 1 Director, Ann Kilpatrick. Charlotte Kohler, Regent, Joyce Scott Chapter. Cheryl Gosnell, Regent, Snow Campaign Chapter. Carol Pollock, Regent, Walhalla Chapter. Rook Field, Regent, Wizard of Tomasi Chapter. I would also like to recognize Cameron Castor, President of the Dicey Langston Chapter, South Carolina Society, Children of the American Revolution, as well as being the second Vice President of the South Carolina Children of the American Revolution, and Renee Castor, the Senior President of the Dicey Langston Chapter, SCCAR, as well as the Fort Prince George daughter. I also want to express my thanks to all the other South Carolina daughters who are present today. I know that Bethlehem Butler has chapter members here. Are there any other chapters that I failed to call?
Andrew Pickens.
Andrew Pickens, I'm so sorry, the daughters of Andrew Pickens. I want to thank the daughters of Andrew Pickens Chapter and the Wizard of Tomasi Chapter, who are assisting the Fort Prince George daughters with the reception that will follow the ceremony, and to all SAR chapters that made this ceremony possible. At this time, I would like to introduce David Smith, President, South Carolina Society, Sons of the American Revolution.
Good morning. The Sons of the American Revolution is comprised solely of men who are direct descendants of the first American patriots. These patriots were men who fought for or materially supported liberty and self-governance. They fought for freedom from tyranny and freedom from an overreaching government. We, as a fraternal organization with direct ties to these great patriots, take honor in commemorating the battles and skirmishes that took place during our American Revolution. We also take tremendous personal pride in perpetrating the memory of these individual men who, by their services and sacrifices during the War of the American Revolution, achieved the independence of the American people. In December 1745, the patriot we remember and honor here today, Joseph Chapman, was born in the colony of Virginia. As a 31-year-old, he fought against the Cherokee Indians as a captain in the North Carolina militia. His military service to the cause of American freedom continued with service around Wilmington, North Carolina, and Camden, South Carolina. In the great colony of South Carolina, Joseph served under the famous Andrew Pickens, who was called Sky Gunsta, or Wizard Owl, by the Cherokee Indian. Joseph fought at the Siege of 96 under Captain Robert Anderson and was later a dragoon, where he fought as mounted cavalry. Eventually, Joseph was severely wounded while in battle with the Cherokee, but he overcame his wounds and with his wife Mary eventually settled in Pickens County. He saw the fruit of his effort to form a new nation of independent, self-ruled people and lived during the presidencies of George Washington, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, James Monroe, John Quincy Adams, and Andrew Jackson. Joseph was a strong man with great vitality and good health who lived to the age of 90. He left behind children and grandchildren. Some of his family are here today, and I'd like to welcome them to this solemn commemoration where we mark the resting place of the great patriot, their grandfather, Joseph Chapman. At this time, I have the honor to introduce my good friend, the State Regent of the South Carolina Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, Bonnabelle Moffett. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I bring you warm greetings on behalf of the almost 5,000 daughters of the South Carolina Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, on this occasion where we honor Captain Joseph Chapman. As like organizations engaging in related missions and objectives dedicated to promoting historic preservation, education, patriotism, and honoring the patriots of the Revolutionary War, we are here today to remember the lives of those who served and honor those serving in the armed forces of our nation, and to their families who endure sacrifices every day on our behalf. Today we show appreciation and respect as we remember the fallen and honor those who serve, and to teach our children the value of freedom. At this time, I would like to introduce Cameron Castor, President of the Dicey Langston Chapter, NSCAR, and Second Vice President of the South Carolina Society, CAR. Cameron?
On behalf of the State President, Jay Bobo, I'm honored to bring greetings on behalf of the South Carolina Society, Children of the American Revolution. As SC, CAR remembers the lesser-known battles and skirmishes of this year, we are honored to remember Joseph Chapman, who served valiantly in our fight for independence in North Carolina and South Carolina. The South Carolina Children of the American Revolution is honored to participate in remembering and honoring Joseph Chapman. Whoa.
Thank you, everybody. A couple things I'd like to mention before we get going with our program. Today is Purple Heart Day. And from what I understand, we have Purple Heart recipient in the audience.
It's a great honor for me to stand here. First, before we get too far, either stand or raise your hand if you're a veteran. Look around, ladies and gentlemen. This is the next. Thank you for your service to the country. The whole nation thanks you. As they mentioned today, and I didn't know this till I was listening yesterday coming home, that today is Purple Heart Day. And I have a distinct honor of recognizing a Purple Heart recipient as part of our chapter color guard. Mr. Lance Dickinson, would you please stand? Lance was a War Officer helicopter pilot in Vietnam, and he got shot, hit, and all that. Spent a number of days and weeks, months in recuperation in the hospital. But Lance, we thank you very much. He's also the commander of our local American Legion post, heavily involved in numerous organizations dealing with veterans and others that have mental and PTSD issues. But Lance, thank you for your sacrifice to this country. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Once in a while, we have something like that. We need to announce it. Thank you very much. This year is the 250th anniversary of the United States of America. You will be hearing more from the sons and the daughters about this celebration this year. Now we're going to start. All this was just preamble. Our first speaker, Ben Haygood, I've heard him speak before, and it's just absolutely amazing the stuff this guy keeps in his head. He's the representative of the Haygood family, Ben Haygood.
Thank you and good morning. When Ron Chapman asked me to be here today, I envisioned a small family gathering of the Chapmans. I will tell you, when I drove up this morning and saw this crowd, I became quite nervous because my remarks I basically thought about in the car on the way here from Anderson today. So you'll excuse me if this seems a little disjointed, but I would like to welcome everyone here on behalf of the Haygood family. Of course, you're at Haygood Mill. My great-great-great-grandfather's legacy is Haygood Mill. And if you had a chance or going to visit the cemetery today, my great-great-great-grandfather and relatives are buried there, as I will be someday, not too soon, I hope. But it's a beautiful place. As a child, my father would take me to the cemetery, and I always imagined what in the world was that stone structure just outside the fence at our cemetery. And if you can imagine, if you haven't seen it, it's a small square rock foundation about 3 or 4 feet high. And I said, there has to be someone buried there, but we never knew until now. So we are so proud to recognize Joseph Chapman, Captain Joseph Chapman, and today's grave marking ceremony. So again, welcome on behalf of the Haygood family. We're very happy to have you here. Enjoy yourselves. Enjoy this beautiful countryside and enjoy the mill, of course. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Ron. Ron Chapman is a descendants chapter of the North Carolina Society of the Sons of the American Revolution and Grave Marking Committee. Ron?
Well, good morning. Well, good morning. It is great to see this crowd here today. I don't think I can say how honored I am to be able to be up here doing this today. First of all, on behalf of the Chapman family, I would like to thank Dr. Robert Bruce, Tom and Ben Haygood, Gary Haygood Brightwell, and the entire Haygood and Bruce family for their cooperation and compassion. It is by their kind permission that the gravesite of Joseph and Mary Chapman has been recognized and restored. A big thank you is due to Nancy Chapman Creighton and her parents Ira and Jewel for the years of research that formed the basis of the search for Joseph Chapman's grave, and to Ernie Chapman and the Chapman Family Association for their work, including the progress on DNA. Thanks also to local historian Dennis Chastain and his wife Linda for their efforts in confirming the research that led us to this point, and the extra knowledge they added along the way. A personal thank you to Larry and Jill Chapman, who came along on some of the adventures, and to my wife Rosetta for putting up with all my stomping around looking for cemeteries. I'd like to thank Haygood Mill for the use of their facilities, and I would mention we are not being charged for the use of this facility, but we are obligated by personal honor to donate to this fine facility. There is a donation box back there. Please be generous and help this mill to continue running. The fact that Joseph and Mary Chapman surely had their grain ground right over there makes this a especially meaningful location. Lastly, but certainly not least in any way, thanks to my compatriots with the SAR and the ladies of the DAR for their hard work in planning and carrying out this celebration. And thanks to all the volunteers, including R.J. Gray and Ken Neighbors, who have invested their time and talent to make this day special. Thank you all. Speaking of descendants, we had the family stand a little bit earlier. In my personal branch of the Joseph Chapman family, there are now 9 generations that have descended from Joseph and Mary. And they had 12 children, Joseph and Mary did. Okay, if you assume that all 12 of those children had 4 descendants, and that all of those descendants had 4 descendants, and you carry that down through 9 generations, would you like to make a guess? 1,048,572 possible descendants of Joseph and Mary Chapman have walked this earth. Pretty amazing. So what do we know about Joseph Chapman, and how do we know it? If we had been sitting right here in this exact spot on March 13th, 1833, we could have looked down in this direction where the old dirt road crossed 12 Mile Creek and watched for a horse and buggy making its way to old Pickens Courthouse. That would have been Joseph on his way to file a pension application for his service in the American Revolution. He would have passed right down here, eventually returned right back up the same direction. Much of what we know about him comes from that pension application. And as President Smith mentioned earlier, Joseph told us that he was born on Christmas Day in 1745 in Halifax County, Virginia. Now, Halifax County was actually Lunenburg County in those days, but it became Halifax County before Joseph turned 7, so we'll give him a little bit of a slack on that right there. It was frontier in those days. Imagine this. Listen to this one. This got me when I was researching this thing. In the 13 colonies in 1750, when Joseph Chapman's 5 years old, there's 1.5 million people total in the 13 colonies. Now that's roughly the population of San Diego, California, spread from Georgia to Maine. It was almost all frontier in those days. By the summer of 1776, Joseph was 30. He was married to his wife Mary. We believe Mary to have been a Clark, but we can't prove that definitely. They were living in North Carolina. They'd moved across the state line into Guilford County, North Carolina, roughly where modern-day Greensboro is today. We know that Joseph had ties to the Clark family. They moved along with him. There are several deeds that bear that out, which strengthens the claim that Mary might have been a Clark. But in that summer of 1776, as Joseph Chapman was in Guilford County, Thomas Jefferson was in Philadelphia writing the Declaration of Independence. And during that same time period, in that summer of 1776, the Cherokee Nation rose against all the settlers in the frontier from Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, up into Virginia. They attacked that entire frontier border, killing over 100 settlers, 37 in Rowan County, North Carolina alone. So on July 30th, the Continental Congress passed a resolution authorizing the militia to invade Cherokee territory and try to remove the Cherokee as a threat. The Cherokee were allies of the British. The Patriots were fighting British and Tory allies on one hand, and now we're faced with the Cherokee uprising on the other hand. This campaign is generally referred to, at least in North Carolina, as the Rutherford Expedition. This is the one that Joseph Chapman took part in as a captain. The fact that he was elected captain by his own company tells us that he was held in high regard by his neighbors. You were not elected to lead men unless you were respected by those men. The Rutherford Expedition did exactly what it was supposed to do. For the most part, the warriors stayed out of the way of the large bodies of militia. They chose small ambushes and snipers to slow down the Patriots, and casualties were fairly low on both sides. The scorched earth policy was carried out. Over 30 Cherokee villages were destroyed along with their crops. This sounds cruel, and it was. But it removed this Cherokee threat. Never again were the Cherokee able to rise in the strength that they did in the summer of 1776. This is important because 4 years later, a group of over-mountain men that you may have heard of were able to lead a relatively small guard across the mountains in Tennessee, what is today Tennessee, come back across the mountains and join with other militia to annihilate Patrick Ferguson's British force at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Okay? I don't believe the Battle of Kings Mountain would have occurred without the Rutherford Expedition weakening those Cherokees. General Henry Clinton, who was the leader of the British at the end of the Revolutionary War, said that the Battle of Kings Mountain was the first link in a chain of evil which led to the loss of the American colonies. Important battle. Again, the Rutherford Expedition played a major role in that happening. Joseph's next tour of duty did take him down to Wilmington, North Carolina, and then back to the area of Camden, South Carolina, that area he called Pine Tree. There was no major engagements, but he spent 4 months on that tour. After that tour of duty, Joseph and Mary moved their family to South Carolina. They moved to a community called Turkey Creek. This is believed to be in modern-day Edgefield County. I have hunted along tributaries of Turkey Creek, and I am proud to say there are still many turkeys in that area today. Now, Joseph might have moved just for better land. Perhaps he thought he might move away from the danger of the Revolutionary War. If he thought that, he was sadly mistaken. In 1780, the British decided to invade South Carolina, and Joseph had already moved there. In May of 1780, Charleston fell. The Battle of Camden took place that summer. All the Continental Army was run completely out of the state of South Carolina. Cornwallis believed that the entire state of South Carolina was now under British control. However, militia under Francis Marion, Thomas Sumter, and Andrew Pickens had not given up the fight. Joseph Chapman was part of that militia. He served a total of 11 months and 25 days in those years under Robert Anderson. Captain Robert Anderson was one of Andrew Pickens' most trusted officers. He's the gentleman that the city and county of Anderson is named after today. That's Robert Anderson. Joseph was with him for almost a year. He does mention, Joseph does, that he was at the siege of 96. Now, that's an historic site today near Greenwood, South Carolina. It's the best place us Chapman descendants have to go and see where our ancestor fought in the Revolutionary War. If you haven't been there, you need to go. It's a great facility. This siege was the longest field siege of the American Revolution, lasting almost a month. Joseph tells us that he was there from the time the first spade of dirt was thrown up, which sounds to me like he did a lot of digging. Now, siege warfare means you dig trenches and try to get closer and closer to a fort that you're trying to take. The Patriots under Nathaniel Greene, Andrew Pickens was there as well, were trying to take this fort at 96. They got very close, but then they got word that the British General Lord Rawdon was approaching from Charleston with a relief column. So the Patriots made one last ditch attempt to take the fort and were beaten back. General Nathaniel Greene moved his army back. Lord Rawdon was able to give relief to that fort. However, Rawdon knew he could not hold the fort with Greene's army hovering close by, and so 2 weeks later, 96 was evacuated and burned. That was the last British outpost in the interior of South Carolina. And the British were now confined along the coast, including Charleston, for the remainder of the war. Now, Andrew Pickens wrote that after 96 was evacuated, many of the Tories that had defended it went to the Cherokee Nation and started stirring up the warriors again to attack Georgia and South Carolina. And so, in the fall of 1782, Joseph Chapman took part in the last major campaign of the American Revolution to take place in South Carolina. This was the action in which he was under Captain Robert Maxwell, and they once again attacked the Cherokee Nation. Joseph tells us that he was at a village called Tesendy, which is just south of modern-day Franklin, North Carolina. That entire Cherokee village was captured and taken. And then the next day, Joseph says that he was out on a scout with Robert Maxwell and his company of about 25 men. They ran across a small Cherokee camp. The warriors scattered. The Patriots scattered and pursued the warriors. Joseph says he was chasing two warriors up a mountain. He paused to fire his flintlock rifle, which misfired. When his rifle misfired, a Cherokee warrior turned and shot him through the body with his own muzzle-loading rifle. Now, 25% of all battle wounds in the American Revolution resulted in death. If you were injured in the arm, you had a 25% chance of dying from infection. The odds of surviving a wound through the body were next to nothing, and yet Joseph did that. He survived under the care of a Dr. Russell in that winter of 1782 and 83. By the time he was fully healed, however, the American Revolution was over. From that point, Joseph Chapman moved his family northward by stages over about a 2-decade period, about 20 years. It took them to move from the Edgefield area to finally here, just off of modern Midway Road, about 1.5 miles from us. He was in his late 50s. He was roughly my age when he arrived here. He would spend his last 32 years of his life in this area, except for a short period of time when he moved to Georgia to participate in the land lotteries there. Now, he was already in his 80s at that point. I'm sure he had no intention of moving there permanently, but he was trying to get extra land for his children to settle on in Georgia, and was successful in doing that. We have a lot of evidence that Joseph cared very much for his family. As they moved northward through South Carolina, the grown children tended to move along with their parents. Many of them wound up in this area as well. So now Joseph and Mary wound up here on Midway Road in about 1804. If we had been here again, March 13th, 1833, we might have seen him return back to his home. Mary, his wife, died before Joseph in about 1833, and Joseph buried her within sight of their cabin. The cemetery was surrounded, or the grave site was surrounded by the rock walls that Mr. Ben Haygood alluded to. And Joseph allowed room inside that burial spot for his own grave when that time came, which happened on January 18th, 1836, and when he joined his wife over inside those stone walls. I often wondered why Joseph didn't leave a will. He was not a man of letters. That's not surprising given his frontier upbringing. However, I believe he did exactly what he intended to do. He talked to his neighbor Benjamin Haygood and asked Benjamin to be administrator of his estate, because what he planned was simply for his belongings to be sold and the money to be distributed amongst all the heirs. That's exactly what happened. The place was auctioned in the summer of 1837. The Reverend John Burdine bought the property. It eventually became the Haygood family property and has remained so to this day. But Joseph was able to take care of his descendants due to this sale of his estate, Benjamin Haygood having done an excellent job of finding the heirs, even scattered out as far as Indiana, to be sure that they got paid. So, Joseph did die at the age of 90. Now, many of you know that his gravesite and home site was not known until recently. About 2.5 years ago, I decided to make a serious effort to find the grave of Joseph Chapman. It bothered me that we didn't know where the man was buried. It really bothered me. This was a substantial landowner. He should have had some kind of monument that was fairly obvious. But no one knew where it was, and no one was sure where his property lay. However, while rereading A History of Haygood Mill by Gary Haygood Brightwell, I ran across a reference to a Haygood store that's supposed to be on the Mills Atlas. If y'all are familiar with the Mills Atlas, it's a series of maps covering all the state of South Carolina in the 1820s. So actually lying in bed with a smartphone one night, I decided I would Google Mills Atlas, right? Looking for this Haygood store. And when I found Haygood store on Mills Atlas, to my surprise, right beside it is another house marked J. Chapman's. Joseph Chapman's house was very close to the Haygood store building. I yelled out loud, scared my wife. She said, "What's wrong?" I said, "I have found my 5th great-grandfather's house on an 1820s map." Of course, the next step was to compare that old map to a modern map, and I found that there's a very good match between modern-day Cove Creek Road and Midway Road. Again, about 1.5 miles from where we're at here today. So I knew his house was in that general location. I knew that Haygood Cemetery was up in that general location. So I wrote down one day to check out the cemetery. I just thought maybe there's old fieldstone markers in this cemetery that's not inscribed. Perhaps that's where Joseph's buried. I met caretaker Michelle Howard, who said it was fine to visit the cemetery. The Haygood family welcomed visitors there. And to my surprise, when I first drove up to the cemetery, the first thing I saw, Ben, was a white-tailed buck hanging from the fence in the cemetery. The thing had not been there long either. He was inside the cemetery, tried to jump out. He miscalculated a jump and got his back leg impaled on this fence and hung there until he perished. A little sad, isn't it? But let me tell you something. Coming from a family of hunters, I kind of looked upon that as being a sign. I needed to pay attention in this cemetery. Okay? Now, Miss Michelle Howard had mentioned the pile of rocks. She said just outside the cemetery there's a big pile of rocks, and past that's the slave cemetery. I said, okay. Checked out the main part of the cemetery, didn't see anything I thought was promising for Joseph, but then I got over and looked at the pile of rocks. Now, I serve on the Transylvania County Cemetery Board, and I go to a lot of cemeteries. And I immediately knew when I saw this pile of rocks that it was rock walls and it was surrounding graves. I texted my oldest son Nathan, and I texted Jill and Larry Chapman and said, I think I found a good candidate for where Joseph Chapman is buried. But we didn't know if Joseph owned that site at that time. Thanks to the Chapman Family History book by Nancy Chapman Creighton and Ira and Jewel, I knew which deeds to look for. So I went to the Pickens courthouse, I dug out those deeds, and I took those to the mapping department. And this is something to remember, all you researchers. If you've got an old deed that does not have a plat with it, if the calls are legible enough, and I'm going to overwork the county mapping department, aren't I, by telling this. Okay, you can take those deeds, and they can run those calls out and actually create a plat. And when you've got a plat, it is a puzzle piece, because it's the exact shape of a piece of property. They can manipulate that on computers and find where it fits on all the other property lines. When Miss Brenda Horn, my mapping technician, lined those property lines up, she found that Joseph and Mary Chapman had owned the site of Haygood Cemetery. I yelled again. At that point, I called Gary Haygood Brightwell and said, look, do y'all know who's buried inside those stone walls? She said, we have no idea. As Ben alluded to earlier, she said, we've speculated for years. And I said, I think I know who might be buried there. She contacted Dennis Chastain, local historian. Dennis is very well known in this area. Is Dennis here today? He was playing. There he is back there in the back. Hey, Dennis. I've never actually met Dennis or Linda in person, but we have emailed back and forth all spring. But Dennis confirmed my research. He checked with everyone and agreed that Joseph Chapman was very likely buried in those stone enclosures. The Haygood family agreed as well. And so we were able to restore that. My son, Reed Chapman, and my grandson, Jasper Chapman, came down and rebuilt those walls. My son, Nathan Chapman, and my son, Cole Chapman, came down and installed the headstone that's over there today. Also, one further bit of information we discovered along this journey. As Dennis Chastain verified the research, Dennis and Linda continued their research to try to determine exactly where that Haygood store was located. You know, the Haygood store that started the whole thing with the Mills Atlas. In the process of doing that, they interviewed a gentleman by the name of Hoyt Grant, who told them that in 1932 he was born in a double two-story log cabin very close to the caretaker's house over at Haygood Cemetery. Now, a double log cabin has got a breezeway through the middle, open. Those hillbillies would call that a dog trot. So we know roughly where Joseph's house stood and roughly what it looked like, because Dennis concluded this house was old enough to have been Joseph and Mary Chapman's home. The house burned in the 1930s, by the way, not long after Hoyt Grant lived there as a very small child. But I can just about picture that home place. I can picture that breezeway. I can picture Mary and Joseph sitting there in rocking chairs, and Mary is fanning herself like I see some of the ladies trying to do out there today. It's hot down here in the summertime, doesn't it? And I imagine if I passed along in front of that house place and I raised a hand and waved at Joseph and Mary, and I hollered and said, Joseph, I thank you for your service in the American Revolution. I think he'd probably just snort and say I was just doing my duty. But then I think that he and Mary would look at each other and they would smile just because someone had remembered. And that's why we're here today, is to remember. With that in mind, I would like to ask Larry Chapman, Color Guard Commander, to come forward and remove the covering from the marker here in front of me. Thank you, Larry. And now it is my honor, on behalf of both the sons and daughters of the American Revolution, to dedicate this marker that recognizes his service in the Revolutionary War to the memory of Patriot Captain Joseph Chapman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. I can only imagine how many hours went into that presentation. Now we come to the part of the program where you can see the wreaths up here, and you that aren't daughters or sons want to know what that's going on. Well, each chapter has a wreath, and we present these wreaths at every program we're at. And I'm going to read the names of the chapters of the wreath, and if the members of that chapter would stand when they're called and give their salute. First one is Scott Collins from the Georgia Society, Sons of the American Revolution. Elizabeth and Beckett Chapman, French Grand River Society, Children of the American Revolution. Carolyn Nations, Fort Prince George Regent. Ted Walker, President of the Henry Lawrence Chapter. Craig Isaacson, the Blue Ridge Chapter, the North Carolina Society, Sons of the American Revolution. Penny Summy, Regent, Abraham K. Kendall, National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution. Regent Cheryl Gospel, Snow Campaign, National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution. Regent Carol Pollock, Walhalla Chapter, Daughters of the American Revolution. Joe Babb, Cambridge Chapter, Sons of the American Revolution. Charlotte Kohler, Regent, Joyce Scott, Daughters of the American Revolution. Bonnie Moffett, South Carolina State Regent, Daughters of the American Revolution. Renee Castor, South Carolina Children of the American Revolution. And the chapter that we represent, if all the members of the General Andrew Pickens chapter would please stand and present. Thank you. Okay, if you would, please join me on the back of your program for the Sons of the American Revolutionary recessional. Until we meet again, let us remember our obligations to our forefathers who gave us our Constitution, Bill of Rights, independent Supreme Court, and the nation of free men. Musket salute. Take your post. Would you all please stand?
Ready? Take aim. Fire.
northward, march.
I'd like to thank the North Carolina and the South Carolina Color Guards, as well as the North Carolina and the South Carolina Musket Brigade. Our bagpiper today is R.J. Gray. I'd like to thank several other organizations. First, the General Andrew Pickens chapter, the Blue Ridge chapter of the North Carolina Society, and the Fort Prince George chapter of the National Society Daughters of the American Revolution. We'd like to thank the Chapman family, the Haygood Mill Historical Society, Gary Haygood Brightwell, Tom Haygood in Pickens County for their significant contributions, making this ceremony possible and preserving this historic site. We would also like to thank the Andrew Pickens Chapter National Society Daughters of the American Revolution and the Wizard of Tomasi Chapter National Society Daughters of the American Revolution. Thank you for their support. Thank you all for coming today. The family is invited to go to the cemetery. If you haven't been there before, it's very small, and if you're going to go, if we could, please carpool to keep as few cars as we can in there as possible. Thank you all for coming today.
All right.